Welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. Today I am joined, as always, by the beautiful, talented, wonderful Amy Hollenkamp.
Hello. How's everyone doing?
I haven't given you the roaring crowd intro in a while. I feel like I've let you down somehow.
It's been like one episode that you haven't done it.
I know it, but it feels like a lot to me. So I'm going to get back into it. I'm going to make you feel super awkward at the beginning of every episode from here on out.
Okay.
You have my word.
Oh, man.
Oh, good. So, Amy, before we hit the record button and got on this fateful episode, we were noodling about how this is similar but different to one that we had done in the past. And I'm not going to reveal it yet. We're going to keep this a secret. But we'll see if anybody can guess it on their own. But this is a little bit similar, but also different to an episode we did this season. The working title for this one right now is When It Feels Good. And I wonder, would you like to satisfy the curiosity of the viewers at home? What on earth is this episode about?
Yeah, I think it's about when you try an intervention and you get positive benefits and maybe you even feel better or you're reaching your goal with that intervention. Does that automatically mean that it's the best long-term intervention or like the sustainable solution for you for your health goals? And this can be for diet-related interventions or supplemental interventions. It's like something
maybe even something else too.
Yeah.
Like
and
exercise.
Again, and these things could serve like a time and a place too, you know, if you do a dietary intervention for a period of time. But I think what happens is that people will do an intervention and get benefits, and then that creates a feedback loop where they're like, hey, this thing's working for me. I'm going to keep doing it, even if it might, to some degree, hinder long-term sustainable goals.
Well, it gives you this illusion or puts these blinders on you. And I'm going to get right into an example of this to paint the picture more accurately for people. So as an example, let's take somebody who is eating a standard American normal diet, like chips, soda, McDonald's, occasionally a vegetable, but not super healthy, highly processed diet. And then let's say that they make some friends or go to a meetup or get involved with yoga or something, and they meet people and they decide, I'm going to go vegan. And they do, and they increase their plant food consumption out the wazoo. They're getting fiber like never before. They're getting vitamins and minerals crossing into their bloodstream for the first time, maybe in their entire life. And they feel really damn good, right? Like to go from McDonald's and Twinkies over to green smoothies and big salads and like kale chips would be a tremendous change. And it's kind of to be expected that you would feel better on that. But what we're talking about here is like, does that mean that that person has to or should do that for a long-term period of time is the question here. So in the case of somebody who goes vegan, let's say they feel great from that increase in fiber and folate and vitamin C and whatever else, but then, they start to become iron deficient or B12 deficient or zinc deficient, or they're not getting as much protein. So these things might take a little while to really set in. And now you have somebody who's very much feeling stuck and they're not super healthy anymore. But oftentimes people in that position are going to be dead set that they need to stay a vegan because, well, look, it was this miracle thing for me. Oh my God, right. The contrast between where I was and what I did when I became a vegan was so tremendous. That's all the proof I need. I know this is the right thing for me. But they don't realize, again, like why they got the short-term benefit versus what is this strategy doing to their body in the long term. Mm-hmm. And that, again, I think that this might be one of the most powerful types of blinders that people can have on them. It's one thing for somebody else to tell you, you should do this, it's healthy, but for you to have the experience yourself and feel better in that short period of time and see the contrast, it's going to be really, 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 really hard to convince you that this diet is not right for you.
I think a lot of that gets baked into sometimes these things becoming your identity. Like I remember even when I was doing low Fodmap and doing more of the restrictive gut stuff, just some people that were really into health and wellness or that were into gut health were like, oh, you're doing that? And it's like this connection thing. And you're basically giving the spiel to other people about all the benefits you're getting from it. It like reinforces it each time you talk.
I definitely got that with gluten.
Yeah,
in the beginning,
for sure.
Like,
I think that there's an element of that too, like a social element of you've promoted this particular diet, or some people do. Some people are a little more low key about some of their strategies, but I do find, I know during my journey, there was a little bit of me promoting that I'm doing something, and I don't think I was crazy about it.
Yeah.
Where I was, talking about it to someone that I knew didn't care. I wasn't doing that. But if there was an interested party, I remember feeling very passionate about it and that it was really helpful and that I needed to do these things. And, I think that reinforces some of the belief behind the need to keep doing some of these things. And I think that the restrictive diets in terms of IBS, SIBO related diets are a lot of times the same way, where people get tons of benefit at first reducing fibers, where they're like, whoa, I'm not bloated. My bowel movements have gotten better. And then that's the message they've gotten when they switch their diet after being in pain or really bloated prior to the diet. So they're getting this message that the diet really helped their symptoms. So to me, it makes sense that a lot of people stay on it or have trouble getting off of it, even though it's presented as a short-term tool.
Well, hold on. It is in the IBS space, not in the SIBO world. I was just going to say the opposite. I think that you couple the idea of somebody's experience and really decreasing symptoms, then you pair that with the idea that FODMAPs are poorly absorbed, right, or that they feed the SIBO. And then it's reinforcing what this person has already come to believe, which is, oh my God, FODMAPs must be bad.
Right.
Right? Like they're feeding the SIBO. Of course they're bad. And then, they're going to double down on that.
Right. And you feel better. So, is that just like, I'm all good. I'll just keep doing low FODMAP and ride into the sunset. And I think we've worked with people long enough to see that there's long-term issues when someone just rides off into the sunset doing low FODMAP for like 5 years. There's a lot of risk and it doesn't really resolve the issue. It's more of a Band-Aid. So you might be feeling better, or again, especially at the beginning, you feel better. I think it loses its efficacy over time, but because the belief is so strong that I have to do this or I have to starve the SIBO, I think that blinds people and it makes people so fearful of other foods that it's hard to add other foods in because the threat level is so high. So it does pigeonhole people, but just because you're feeling better on low FODMAP doesn't mean it's time to throw in like you found the solution. And I think that some people do that to some degree where they're like, well, I can just do low FODMAP and like that's my answer. And it usually backfires long term. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's sort of analogous to what I talked about in the first scenario where somebody goes vegan and they get all of this benefit getting nutrients and fiber that they never received before, but then the deficiencies creep in over time and leave them in more of a pickle. I think similarly, we were talking about an article before we hit record, so if you guys want to look this one up, it's PubMed ID 277-47984. And basically they took a group of either IBSD or IBSM patients and they put them on a low FODMAP diet for 9 weeks. They did 3 weeks of low FODMAP. Then they were double-blindedly assigned to either receive a supplement with FOS, which is a big old FODMAP, or like inulin, or maltodextrin, which was the placebo. And they did that for 10 days. And then they did I think it was a 3-week washout period. And they were monitoring the microbiome and they were monitoring inflammatory markers throughout this process. And basically what they were saying in this paper was that more people had symptom relief when they did low FODMAP the whole time, pretty much, like they had the placebo version of the pill, versus people who did low FODMAP for 3 weeks, then took a bunch of FOS, then did low FODMAP for 3 weeks. But they also said that serum levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, so IL-6 and IL-8, as well as fecal bacteria, actinobacteria, bifidobacterium, and Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, total short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, all of these things significantly decreased on the low FODMAP diet compared to baseline. So on the one hand, you have pro-inflammatory chemicals that are reducing, which I think that makes sense based on the fact that most of these people felt better doing low FODMAP. It actually reduced their inflammation to some degree or another when they went low FODMAP for that short period of time. But the key is that in conjunction with that, they were also seeing a decrease in bifidobacterium, Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, your short-chain fatty acids, and butyrate. And those all, we know, these are very, very beneficial and very, very anti-inflammatory. So what probably happens with low FODMAP is that you kind of take some stress off of the system. You kind of get like a little bit of a Control-Alt-Delete, so to speak, on your system. It's a PC reference. You wouldn't understand Mac users. But anyway, you get this little bit of like a reset on the system, and you get a short-term anti-inflammatory effect, but at the expense of your beneficial microbes and your short-chain fatty acids. And I bet you anything, if they redid this exact same study, but they monitored the inflammatory cytokines and the short-chain fatty acids a year later, I bet you $1 million right now, those pro-inflammatory cytokines would be higher than they were at baseline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it might just take time for the effect of the low bifido or the low Faecalibacterium or the low short-chain fatty acids or butyrate to take effect. But again, people are so blinded by that short-term benefit and that sweet, sweet relief that they get in the beginning that sometimes it can make them closed-minded to change.
Yeah. And again, I think that there's an element of just outright fear that comes into play. And especially, I think it could be at play still in the vegan scenario. But I do think in the IBS space in particular, there's such a high incidence of food fears and things like that come into play. And then it's just such a can of worms to move through. And when you're inherently labeling foods as almost like dangerous, and I would say there's probably some elements of that in the vegan world or in the keto world or in the carnivore world where it's like carbs are dangerous or animal products are dangerous. It inherently is going to make you less open and fearful. And it's not even that you're worried that you're going to lose the benefit. It's just that fear comes in and really makes it harder to think rationally. I think that's something that I definitely learned through my like OCD anxiety experience, is that sometimes you can't rationalize with it because more doubts and more fears kind of pop up the more you try to argue with it. And it's so tempting, like the anxious mind wants to do that. Where it's like, oh, I just need to like make sure I can totally figure out how I'm going to react to this food. It is something that I feel like is a big element here, is assessing your level of fear and kind of where you're at in that, from that standpoint, if you are stuck on any sort of diet or intervention that maybe had some benefits at the beginning. And I don't think we're against those benefits, but I think a lot of people do to some degree say like, oh, I found my answer and I'm just going to stick to it. And then again, the longer you stick to it, the harder it is to break out of it, I think both physically and mentally. You know, we work with people far down the line of being low FODMAP, so it still can be done. It's just like, it'd be easier, we can both agree, to catch people earlier in their journeys than later, maybe where we find them. But yeah, I think the fear element is huge, and being able to overcome the fear is huge.
I agree. I think that there's probably mostly a fear thing happening in the IBS SIBO world with low FODMAP and these SIBO diets. I think that there's a fear of the symptoms themselves and a fear that you're feeding the bad boogeyman. I think that vegan and like vegetarian diets, I think that there's a lot more of like a judginess and like a moral high horse kind of element to it of like, I can't believe you would eat a cow. Like they're sentient beings. They have feelings
as a
too.
Former vegetarian, by the way.
Yeah. 11-year vegetarian people. Like I know. I don't know though. I didn't get into it for that reason though. I was the laziest child on planet Earth, and I used to complain to my parents that meat was too hard to chew. And so when my mom presented this as an option to me that I could be a vegetarian at the age of 11, I was like, yeah, all right, that sounds good to me. Why not? So I'm very glad I never really got into that like moral high horse with being a vegetarian. I just, like I would bring my own veggie burger to the barbecue or the cookout or whatever. I never expected anybody to be able to feed me my special diet, but I also wasn't going to eat the burger or whatever that you were providing. So I just kind of, I would nonchalantly like ask you to throw my veggie burger on the grill when you were done and didn't make a big deal out of it. But I know there are a lot of people in that world who, yes, there's a lot of identity and a lot of morality that's wrapped up in that dietary choice. And again, I think when you start wrapping up the morality of it, now you're getting into territory of like, ooh, you're almost asking somebody to change their religion. And that's going to be real hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Now, what would you say? So we said that the IBS SIBO world probably is more driven by fear in this regard. The vegan vegetarian world is probably a bit more driven by like the moral high horse kind of piece of it. What about keto? I feel like keto and even carnivore kind of on this continuum together. I feel like they are sort of a blend of both, but I think that they're maybe leaning more towards the moral high horse side of things.
You know what? I almost wonder if it's more just driven by really convincing, like influencer-esque, almost poor education, poor nutrition education as a whole. And again, I don't think I'm not anti-keto, so I want to throw that out there. There's a time and place
and
for keto.
Neither of us are anti-low Fodmap.
Right. I would maybe say that I'm anti-carnivore. I think I'd be comfortable saying
likewise,
that.
I'm cool saying that too.
But yeah, I mean, I think the problem is the utility of that diet has now expanded into like every health condition, and it's just not appropriate for every health condition and every person.
You know the meme of Oprah Winfrey where her arms are out like this? It's like, you get a car, you get a car. That's what it makes me think of. Like, just like a doctor throwing out diagnoses and like, you get keto, you do keto, you do keto. Like Hashimoto's, fuck yeah.
Right.
Tumor on your left toe? Hell yeah. You get keto too.
Right.
Like, doesn't matter. Whatever ails you, man.
SIBO, again, like people are doing keto for SIBO. I think it's become like this jack of all trades type of diet that's for everyone, and that's just not the case at all. So like for me, I feel like that one's wrapped up in a bunch of weird influencer-esque type stuff, if that makes sense. The
vegan vegetarian world, I think, could be said that like there are some really big, massive following like vegetarian and vegan accounts out there too. So I think that also could be the case.
And I think the keto space too, with keto, the interesting thing, like a lot of people do it for weight loss. I mean, that's another one where if you remove carbs from your diet, you're going to lose a ton of water weight. So a lot of times it's like, I lost 15 pounds in a week. And it's like, but no, honey, you lost like 14 pounds of water weight and 1 pound of true weight. So that's one as well that gets really confusing when they actually compare diet related. If they look at research between diets that are like low fat for weight loss and diets that have moderate carbs, it's again, when they account for that water weight, a lot of the true weight loss is the same, or sometimes there's even more of a benefit in the carb group. It's one of those things where it can give you a lot of results right away because of that water loss.
Or the illusion of results.
Right. A lot of results right away. The illusion of that with how much water you're losing and how much weight you're losing. But in reality, I think it's, again, not what you think it is half the time, especially upon starting it, but that dopamine hit or something when you step on the scale and see you're down 15 pounds in a week or whatever it is, some insane thing. I will say this till I'm blue in the face. My husband does stuff like this too, where he'll be like, I lost 6 pounds in a week. And I'm like, no, something's up there. You definitely did not lose 6 pounds in a week. Like, you lost some water weight of some sort.
Oh, sweetie.
Right. So if you ever lose like a big chunk of weight in a week and it doesn't make total sense, it's probably water.
I bet that this could even happen with the first scenario of somebody going vegan. Because if you think about water weight, you could loosely say water retention.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking about things like electrolytes, and you start thinking about things like inflammatory cytokines, manipulating like your water retention.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, in the first scenario, you have somebody who's on a standard American diet, and then they cut out all the processed food and they go vegan, or perhaps keto. They're probably drastically reducing their intake of salt, because you don't realize how much salt is in like soda and processed food. You're dropping your sodium intake massively. And then, of course, you're going to lose water weight because you're no longer retaining that water. And if there's an anti-inflammatory effect, because again, now you're finally getting fiber and folate for the first time in your entire life, yeah, the inflammatory cytokines might be a bit different. And now you're going to appear to lose weight from that. And again, like, we're not knocking these things intrinsically. I think the really important thing is discerning the difference between a short-term Band-Aid versus a long-term strategy. That's the whole point of this episode. And there could be cases where it's totally appropriate for somebody to go plant-based for a short period of time. There could be a scenario where it's appropriate for somebody to do low Fodmap or SCD for a short period of time. But we don't want you to be under the spell of that short-term benefit to the point where you're no longer able to listen to reason and you become stubborn and pig-headed about maintaining that same diet because you think it was this magical cure-all.
Right.
I'm going to tie this in briefly with something I said in the last episode too. When people go keto, they'll say like, oh, my blood sugar's great. I have like the insulin sensitivity and like the blood sugar of a 20-year-old again. It's great. I love keto so much. On some level, I'm not impressed. Of course, your blood sugar is lower because you're artificially suppressing it by avoiding carbohydrates. Like, I don't know. I'm just not that impressed. You show me somebody who can eat a piece of pizza and an ice cream cone and their blood sugar doesn't go to the moon and back. That I'm actually impressed by. It's kind of like when I went gluten and dairy free, I used to say all the time, I was like, I'm no longer impressed by basic bitch cooking anymore.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry. You think you can make anything appetizing by smothering it in breadcrumbs and cheese and butter? Of course, because those things are freaking delicious.
Right.
You show me a cook who can make broccoli and Brussels sprouts appetizing with no breadcrumbs and no cheese and no butter. That is impressive.
Right.
And similarly, I'm not impressed by your blood sugar handling when you're on keto. Let's see you eat a big old bowl of spaghetti and see what happens then, buckaroo.
Oh my gosh.
That's the real rodeo.
Yeah, and it's true. And again, I was saying before we jumped on to like extending this beyond just diets. I think people go through this a lot supplementally where they are like, oh, I fixed my gut stuff, but they're literally on like 10 supplements. And you're like, I'm glad that these things have worked and are helping symptoms. But in reality, if you're relying on so much supplemental support, you haven't really resolved the issue. Now, some of these supplements might be totally fine to take long term, so it might not necessarily be a situation like the diet where I think there's some cons with taking different things. Like some gut support supplements, I really don't think there's too many cons to take like an enzyme or like a prokinetic long term. It's going to be like
probiotic.
Right. It's going to be pretty benign to keep doing that. I don't think there's much risk. But
versus antimicrobials, for example.
Right. Versus antimicrobials. But again, antimicrobials, again, could make you feel better. And you get in the same situation where you say, oh my gosh, I felt so much better when I took the antimicrobials. And that's what also gets people stuck on the round after round after round of antimicrobials. And that didn't really get you better. And I think people kind of think that it is, or that's the illusion in the SIBO space. They think like, oh, now I'm just good, like my gut's good. And they don't focus as much on the rebuilding.
Yeah. Well, yes. And I think there's a couple of things to factor in here. So I think with the conversation of antimicrobials, yeah, this could be analogous. Like, oh, let's say you have an honest to goodness SIBO situation or candida or some sort of dysbiosis, and you take a whole bunch of oregano oil and you feel like $1 million. That's great. We're not knocking that. It's just that ideally you want to have most of your ducks in a row so that when you come off of the antimicrobial, you are able to do so gracefully and you have the checks and balances in place that you're able to maintain that benefit without needing to constantly take the antimicrobial. But what ends up happening is that people see the antimicrobial as the thing, the cure, the fix, and that's all they really do, or they pair it with a restrictive diet. The entire plan is just kill, starve, kill, starve. But then they try to go back to normal life or normal eating, and it blows up in their face. And then this is why people say, SIBO is a high relapse condition. Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't have to be. If you actually treat it the right way, I don't see my patients relapse very frequently at all anymore.
Right.
If they show up on my schedule now, like my older folks who have been with me for a while, if I see somebody pop up on the schedule for the first time in 2 years, my immediate question is, what happened?
Right.
And it's almost always, oh, I took a PPI or I took an antibiotic or something really big happened. It's not just a relapse out of the blue, like what happens, I think, chronically
or like
for a lot
some
of people.
really stressful event. I feel like that happens a lot. I agree. I mean, and again, I think the same thing happens because you get that relief, or at least some people do. There's so many people that don't get relief from antimicrobials. It's interesting that that isn't talked about very much in the SIBO space. But again, I mean, there's a lot of people, and maybe it's more of our population, but there's a lot of people that don't get any relief from antimicrobials. But I could see how someone who gets relief, they go off the antimicrobial and they're like, well, man, my symptoms are back and I felt like $1 million on that antimicrobial before, and they get stuck in that cycle. And again, you're right. You have to kind of rebuild and build resilience in the systems that help keep the gut functioning optimally. And a lot of people just cut corners.
Well, they might not even be consciously cutting corners.
That's
they might
true.
not even
That's
realize.
100% true.
I do, to be clear, I think there are a lot of people who know damn well that stress or sleep or something foundational is a factor, and they are on some level ignoring it. But some people just don't know.
Well, and that's totally true. And the problem really is with providers too, because they're doing this as well. They're feeding into like, oh, my client felt really good on the antimicrobials. Let's just do that again.
Well, and they're the ones coming up with the treatment plan and the protocol, and they're the ones educating their patients on SIBO or whatever it might be. So it's like whatever handouts you get at that provider's office or whatever links or references they send you with or whatever they teach you, you're imprinting on your patients when you do that, and you're building this world for them. And you better damn well hope that you're building an accurate world.
Yeah. I think most people, like you said, don't realize because they're perceiving the problem as the bacteria. So they think, okay, I'm resolving this by just taking the antibiotic or the herbals that I'm getting from my provider, and like, that's good. And again, I think most people over time that we work with, it becomes clear at some point that it's not an effective strategy long term, but it can still be something. Like I'm sure you have people like this where they're like, the last 3 rounds weren't helpful. And I think it's because they're still holding out hope for the short-term benefit they got from the first couple rounds. And it's like, and I think eventually people get it, but it is kind of a painful thing to realize at times when you had so much success previous. And it's like, okay, well, we've had 3 rounds that have not been helpful. There needs to be some sort of an adjustment in strategy here. We can't just keep doing the same things. Are you willing to
give this up yet?
Right.
And this might be a good point to reveal. So I felt like this episode was related, but still very different from a conversation we had in episode 130, which we titled Long and Short. And in that episode, we were talking about how, like, oftentimes people are building their strategy and their protocol based on this urgency and this franticness that I need to feel better immediately. And then they're missing the forest for the trees, and they're ignoring huge things that are right in front of their face, or they're doing things that are detrimental to their long-term health. It's the ultimate robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of situation, if you're familiar with that expression. This is a little different. Like, we're talking about the long-term versus short-term game plan thing. I think in this episode, we're trying to paint this picture that when you do feel good in that short-term kind of time frame, it tricks you and it puts blinders on you so that you believe that that is the thing and that is an effective long-term strategy. And we're trying to paint this picture that that's oftentimes not the case.
Right.
So, and I would even argue there are plenty of people who feel better when they go gluten-free, and then they probably don't need to do that for the rest of their life. Like, if they get their microbiome and the rest of their health in order, an awful lot of people could reintroduce gluten without problem. I don't know if that necessarily spans into the world of celiacs like me. I'm willing to say maybe. If I dialed all of my shit in 100%, maybe I would be able to eat gluten again too. But yeah, I think that's the difference between these two episodes that I figured I'd mention eventually.
Right. Yes, totally.
I have one more example that comes to mind. We just finished an episode last week talking about the dreaded MTHFR gene. And, we were talking about methylfolate and kind of this idea of like, why would you need a whole shit ton of methyl donors? Like, that's actually kind of weird if you think about it. Why is your methylation system so poorly buffered that you get like a miraculous benefit from this supplement? And we made the point in that episode of saying your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents probably had MTHFR polymorphisms, and they didn't have methylfolate to take. And like, they probably did all right. So how did they ever survive without their thorn product? So that's another example where somebody could take methylfolate or methyl B12 and they feel amazing, and like their depression lifts away like a curtain and their brain fog is gone and they just feel amazing, like they're on cloud nine, and they think, oh my God, MTHFR was it? This is the answer. This is the cure. I need to take this methylfolate stuff for the rest of my days. It is a goddamn miracle. Holy macaroni. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, again, we had talked about in that episode, maybe that person has lousy blood sugar handling. And that's ultimately the solution. Maybe they just don't get enough of their B vitamins through their diet in general. And of course, you're going to feel better when you take a supplement, you nincompoop. It doesn't mean it has to be methylfolate. Maybe you just feel good on any old regular folate. But you get this idea that just because you feel like $1 million when you take methylfolate the first time, that doesn't mean that you have to do it forever and ever. And that doesn't even mean that MTHFR is like the answer for you.
Check in occasionally, like if you've been doing the same thing for a while. I think sometimes having endpoints, like again, a low Fodmap, I think there should always be like a plan to reintroduce. So sometimes these things should be built in general. But again, I think, assessing like, oh, I've been doing this thing for a while. Is it still helping me or not? Like, or is this still the right path? I think asking those questions are usually relevant, especially if you're doing something like a supplemental intervention or a particular diet. I think there should always be some discussion around how long you're going to do it and when maybe you should check in to see if you need to do more, or if you can continue doing that strategy or adjust the strategy to some degree. I have conversations like that with clients all the time where, maybe they had a deficiency of something, of vitamin D, and we say, let's check your levels to see if you actually need more vitamin D at this point. And we take them off, versus some people, again, are just on vitamin D, like 5,000 IU forever. And it takes adjusting things and making sure we're still sort of getting benefit from things. And I think really focusing on long-term stuff is key too. Deficiency filling, like with a vitamin D supplement's great, but maybe the best strategy is trying to get outside more. Maybe you supplement in the winter, so you come up with kind of more of a long-term approach if you tend to be prone to vitamin D deficiency. But yeah, I think your strategies can change. Like we said in the earlier episode, what are your short-term strategies? What are your long-term strategies? But just because you're feeling better doesn't mean it should be a long-term strategy.
Yeah. And again, like understanding what is a Band-Aid and what is not. And not only understanding that, but also just, again, going back to basics. We say it every episode. And yet, here we are again, doing it again. But like going back to the unsexy basics of sleep, movement, stress, overall nutrition, not disease-specific or condition-specific nutrition, but like, are you getting fiber? Are you getting each of the macros? Are you getting calories? Are you getting vitamins and minerals? Basic bitch kind of stuff, like nothing fancy. Go back to those things. And I can almost guarantee you that every single person listening right now has a deficiency in one of those areas that they could work on.
Right.
Long before they get to MTHFR or, whatever fancy Klebsiella overgrowth you think you have, you probably need to address the thing over here. And I will paint a picture too, to go back to the idea of SIBO for the 8 millionth and third analogy and metaphor presented on this show. If you think of SIBO as a stagnation sort of phenomenon, think of it like you have a little pond and the water has become stagnant because the inlet to that pond has been blocked. Let's say that you've got a cute little family of beavers and they made a big old dam and they blocked the incoming water into that pond. And after a couple weeks or a couple of months, that pond starts to look green and furry and fuzzy and slimy and gross. You could look at the symptom of the pond looking gross and festering, and this would be like looking at the symptom of SIBO. And you could say, gosh, golly, gee, I got to fix that pond. And so you go in and what do? You like go to the pool store and you buy all of the shock off of the shelf, right? Just like a massive truckload of chlorine. And you dump that in and then you run like a pool filter and you want to get this sparkling clean. And you do. And then you think, there we go. The pond is good. My work is done. And you walk away. But you take away the chlorine and you take away the filter. Another month or two goes by. There's no fresh water coming into that pond because the beavers are still there damming up the works. And the pond becomes a festering cesspool again. And you come back in and you're like, man, this pond looks like crap. I've got to treat it again. And this is the equivalent of us coming in and saying, gosh, golly, gee, the SIBO's back. We'd better do antimicrobials. Yes, it's going to clean up the pond. And that can make you feel better. But that doesn't mean that you keep doing that over and over again.
Right.
Ideally, you would start the pump for the filter, throw in a little bit of chlorine, perhaps, maybe, if you even need it. And then you would go over and you would relocate the cute little beaver family to somewhere where they could be happy and not dam up your little imaginary pond. You get rid of the blockage, you get rid of the stagnation, and now you have free-flowing water coming into the pond. The pond is probably going to clean itself in a matter of weeks if you just give it time. But the thing is, you have to remove the blockage.
Right.
But again, it's so easy to see the pond looking sparkling clean from the chlorine and the filter. It's easy to be charmed by that and think, oh, I just need to run the filter and run the chlorine forever and ever and ever. And no, like you're missing the boat entirely if you're doing that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think, again, there has to be some sort of analogy that like the chlorine doesn't work at some point. Where it's like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like maybe there's a resistance or something.
Right. I know.
Or the chlorine kills all the freaking fish in the pond. Right. We didn't even think about the fish in the pond.
And then you have nothing to eat or something.
Yeah, and then the carp is all gone.
Right.
And yeah, you're left crying a river because now you're malnourished. Oh my God, this analogy works really well, actually. You take away the food. Oh my God. We're
We're going to patent
work this in somewhere else.
This.
Yeah, we're going to put this on the gram.
Yes. Well, I don't know if I have anything else major. I hear my daughter like being a little crazy.
A little sassy
She
pants.
didn't nap today, so I feel bad for my poor father dealing probably with a fussy child.
I think all of the parents who are listening right now just in unison did like the Katniss Everdeen thing to you.
Oh, I thought you were going to like do a pretend cigarette like.
Oh, no. Remember, what is it?
I know.
2 fingers or 3 fingers?
I think it's 3 fingers.
Yeah, like may the odds ever be in your favor.
Did I ever tell you my Josh Hutcherson story?
I don't know, actually.
From the Hunger Games. He played
PETA. Who is it? Is that PETA? Maybe?
PETA.
Okay.
So PETA's from like northern Kentucky. So like 30 minutes from here. So he's from like the Cincinnati area. So he was coming to like a Reds game when the Hunger Games was like huge. It might have been like between the first and second. And like it was hilarious because I'm like, oh, that's like so fun. Like, but I'm not like that. I won't be crazy. I really like the Hunger Games, but I was like, I wouldn't be crazy. The second I was around people that were going nuts, I was like, I gotta meet him. I'm like shoving kids. I'm in college, by the way. Like I'm in college. I have a picture with him. I'll have to send it to you. But I'm like, move. I'm getting up like close because it was at a Reds game. And I got a picture with him. And it's so funny because my sister and I spent the rest of the time, we were sitting like right below him and he was in a box. And the whole time we kept going like this. And I don't think he like ever saw us, but the whole game we were doing the Katniss Everdeen salute or whatever you want to call it.
Oh my gosh. He was just like, you're all on drugs.
And I was definitely like, something happened. I guess I can't be around frenzy, because I just get wrapped up in like frenzied fans.
The mob mentality.
Yeah, I get wrapped up in the mob mentality. I was like very shocked by my behavior. Maybe now that I'm older, I would be less intense, but
I don't know though. Do we really want to test this?
I don't think we want to test it. I'm just going to stay away from like highly energetic fans. And like if I am a fan, but I didn't think I was that crazy, I just like cannot be around.
It might be for the best if you never get into K-pop. Because some of the fandoms in K-pop are truly insane.
Yes.
So I could just imagine if you went to like a BTS concert and were exposed to all the armies all around you, you might get sucked into the mob and then we'd never see her again, people. She'd be on a plane to Korea, stalking BTS singers and taking selfies with Jimin. Be good times.
Look, it's true. Like I'm not a Swiftie by any means, but like maybe I could get Swiftied. I don't know if that's a thing, but
can we just talk about Taylor Swift for a second, by the way? So Jess likes Taylor Swift now.
Yeah.
She'll borrow my phone and listen to music when she's showering at night. And she's been listening to Taylor Swift. So we were on the ride to her horseback riding lesson last night. And she asked me to put on a Taylor Swift song. So I did. And my mom was like, oh, you like Taylor Swift now? And she said, yeah. And she asked a little while later, she's like, Mom, could we go to a Taylor Swift concert? And I was like, well, I've liked Taylor Swift for years. I would love to go, but I don't think we'll go in the immediate future. And I mentioned to my mom, I was like, yeah, I think tickets start at like $1,500. And she was like, no.
Yeah.
No. I'm like, oh yeah. So she went on the website. She had to scroll all the way to like October to find a show in the United States. And she clicked on it to look at ticket prices. And she was like, oh my God,
right.
You undershot. I think I had guesstimated $1,200 and she's like, the absolute cheapest nosebleed seats were like $1,800 or something. I was like, yeah, that's a little rich for my blood. I like Taylor Swift, but
and I had a few friends that were able to like get into Ticketmaster because that was a thing. She like Ticketmaster died or something for like 2 days because people were trying to buy the tickets. But I did have a friend who actually was able to buy the tickets because the problem is all the resale stuff too. And she was, I think, able to get them for like $600 or $700, which was like a total steal. And my other friend kept being like, this is a really good investment. I was like, what?
Is it?
I've never heard of a concert as being a good investment. Like, it's fun and you're going to enjoy yourself. And like, if you're a huge Taylor Swift fan, like maybe $700 is worth it. I don't think I could pay above $1,000 if I was a fan of anyone personally. I just, again, like, would be okay skipping even my favorite people if it was that high. But yeah, it just kind of cracked me up that it was such a good investment. And I was like,
I feel like you're grasping at straws at that point. Like
I'm glad that they went and they enjoyed it and they lived their best life. And
I would rather that they frame it as an enjoyable time or self-care rather than an investment. Funny. You know, if you want to talk about investing, that's really more of a conversation about like Beanie Babies and how they're going to be worth a whole lot. Don't tell me otherwise, people. Don't you dare. Because I have like 200 Beanie Babies still in my mom's attic. I shit you not. And they still have all their tag protectors.
Oh my,
I'm not going to brag. I have multiple Princess Diana bears. Amy.
Oh.
So I'm effectively a bajillionaire. And I just make time for the lowly people like you in my life. But I'm going to have it made in the shade. And Mixmaster Mike editing this episode right now is dying on the inside because he does not understand this plan of mine. But
I used to have a Taylor Swift autographed picture. My sister met her right when she blew up. She did like a fair and I was supposed to go, but I was at a basketball tournament and her dad gave us pics, like Taylor Swift pics.
Oh yeah.
They have her face on it. Lord knows where they're at. My little sister got pissed at me one day and destroyed the autograph. She like wrote like with a pen. So it was like, I think I ended up just throwing it away because I was like, it's ruined now.
I was going to say, if you still have it, there you go. There's her graduation present because she's graduating from dental school.
Right.
So there you go. Here, this is the only present I'm giving you.
So instead I'm spending a decent amount of money to go out and watch her graduate. She should be refunding me the thousands of dollars I could have gotten from this autograph picture.
For real.
But my older sister who was there, I don't know if she still has the pics, but that'd be really cool if she did.
Oh, they'd be worth $1 billion now. Okay, so if you have any Taylor Swift gear, that might rival my Beanie Baby stash. Yes. But it's hard to say because, you know, Beanie Babies are very valuable, so it's hard to put a price on that. But
do you have any of the McDonald's, the mini ones? Do you remember?
I do.
Yeah.
Oh, I do. Amy, yes.
I remember how crazy the lines would be at the McDonald's. Or they'd be like out into the street.
Me and my mom.
Yeah. It'd be like 2 hours to wait in line to get a McDonald's Beanie Baby.
It's an embarrassing part of my history that I choose not to talk about.
I was one of 4, and all 3 of the older kids, me, my brother and sister, we were Beanie Baby obsessed too. I don't know who wasn't. It was a total frenzy.
It was the thing. It was the thing of our times, but I'm holding out hope that they'll be worth something someday. So
yes.
Shy of a catastrophic world event, those Beanie Babies are staying in my mom's attic until I can cash those babies in. So,
man.
So yeah, well now these people at home know a little bit more about me and my neuroses, my brain lesions, if you will, that I firmly believe Beanie Babies are worth something someday. We will see you back here for another episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. So stay tuned and we'll see what else we have cooking for you.
Yes.